With the Trump presidency nearing its end, Republican voters are looking towards 2024. A new poll by 7letter. I know polls, but still ask Republicans and independents who their first choice for the 2024 GOP presidential nominee would be. And the results are not really surprising, but also worth discussion.
Very interesting results. Democratic strategist and CEO of Pine Street Strategies, Don Calloway, and co-host of the Realignment podcast, Marshall Kosloff, are back to discuss. Great to see you guys.
Good to see you, Jones.
Marshall, let me throw back up on the screen the poll so we can kind of dive into it a little bit. Obviously, Donald Trump at the top and Mike Pence further down. And I saw some commentary on that online that was like, well, Trump's only at a third of the vote. But then you look and in the number 3 position is Trump Jr. You also have Ivanka pulling in a couple of percent here. I mean, look, it seems like if he wanted to run again in 2024, he pretty much owns the field, and that's that.
I totally agree with that, Crystal. I would give Pence's votes to Trump's as well, too, because I would basically assume that's in the category of evangelicals who like Pence's loyalty to Trump and think he sort of embodies that sort of Christian defender argument that the Trump campaign really sort of highlighted and successfully argued, in my opinion. So that's the key thing here, is that this is basically Trump's race. It's Trump's Republican Party. And this polling is really disastrous for anyone who's sort of trying to chart a path through, regardless of their sort of more populist or more establishment, because it basically means they're going to be stuck in a holding pattern, or for the next 1 to 2 years, they're not going to have any ability to navigate without this sort of out from under them. It's pretty clear that what Trump is going to do, whether or not he runs, he's going to do the reality TV thing where he's going to hold it up until the last possible second before announcing or not.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, it's not the next 1 or 2 years. It's the next 4 years. And Don, I guess my question to you, this is something Crystal has talked a lot about, and I think is really interesting. How does this change the Democratic race? Which is that if you're on the Democratic side, you know, Trump is the ultimate boogeyman. He's the ultimate driver of fundraising dollars and so much more. But will it quash kind of any dissent within the party whatsoever if he's just going to remain on the horizon for the next 4 years to come?
Yeah, it doesn't quash dissent within the party, because once our goal is to beat Trump for the right to lobby Joe Biden. So you see Democrats in the circular firing squad now, a beneficent circular firing squad, fighting over what should be Democratic priorities in this next 4 years. I think what it does for Democrats is kind of empowering, because you say we took their very best shot. Donald Trump got more votes for president than anybody other than Joe Biden in this year. So I think that we have seen Republicans at their best, at their most excited, at their most galvanized, and we've already beaten them. The question is, who is the candidate who can possibly do that? There's conventional wisdom that Joe Biden possibly was the only person who could have done that this year. There's also conventional wisdom that suggests that Joe Biden could be a one-term president. So we can beat them, but who is the candidate to do that? Obviously, the presumptive candidate, if Joe Biden is a one-term president, will be Kamala Harris. And I think that we'll probably have to have some serious discussions behind closed doors about whether or not she's the best positioned candidate to beat us. I think that she certainly could be, or probably is, but I think there's going to be a real debate that we'll have, hopefully not a minute before 3 years from today.
Yeah, I'm sure that debate is already starting. Marshall, on the Republican side, what does it do to the Republican Party? Because it's a really weird, unprecedented dynamic to have this guy who's a former president who maybe will run again, maybe won't run again, who's not in a current elected leadership position, but, you know, on Twitter and in the media and et cetera, really still setting the tone and the pace for the party. Like, what is that going to look like for them?
Yeah, and I want to sort of say that in my answer in response to sort of previous comments, which is that I do actually think a Trump Republican Party where it's pretty clear if Trump is either going to coronate his successor or he himself is going to run, especially when combined with Mitch McConnell's Senate, would pretty much squash any dissent within the Democratic Party, because the level of opposition you would just see in Congress, the level of deep, aggressive attacks from Trump on Biden would just mean that fights over legislation, fights over who gets appointed to what cabinet position, sort of DC inside baseball is going to be such a bad look and frankly such a distraction from what would actually be going on in the country at that point that would sort of squash dissent. So the broader point for the Republican Party then is that if Trump is in this commanding position, you are basically going to see just a deep freeze on any sort of conversations we're going to have. And you're going to see, to our previous segment, a reprise of the Kelly Loeffler debate, where more establishment, traditional Republicans are stuck in this middle ground where they're going to wink at the voter stuff, but they're not going to go too far on it, but they're not going to be particularly aggressive or interesting in ways to be particularly helpful. So it's really just basically a worst case scenario for American politics if we just from a baseline level have this 4-year period where nothing is sort of stuck.
Yeah, and Marshall, the way I think of it is that because Trump himself has made the litmus test of whether you support him, whether you support the voter fraud thing or not, it has nothing to do with policy. So Kelly Loeffler is worth $500 million, and by all accounts is, very much, traditional Reaganite, Republican, really doesn't have any policy litmus test, her or anyone in the Senate, as to their loyalty towards Trump. It really has to do with him personally.
Yeah, and that's the entire dynamic. It's not, we're past the point where we could have a serious debate about Trumpism without Trump, just in the sense that it's not quite clear. But other than the culture war issues, other than fighting the media and sort of establishment, like PMC institutions, sort of the professional managerial class in Wall Street, Hollywood, corporate America, et cetera, other than fighting those degrees, it's not as if Republican voters are competing to see who's going to have the best trade war policy in the Republican Party, who's going to have the industrial policy. It's not about economics. That was pretty clear last month.
I think that's right.
Yep. All right, guys. Great to see you both.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Coming up, outreach for a vaccine among underserved communities is essential to getting the virus under control. Journalist Ed Jelani is going to discuss the challenge that this presents when Rising continues.